All right. So, my name is Kristen Bellamy Lloyd, and I want to welcome you guys to the Co Teaching Inclusion Journey presented by Colleen Myers and Bhavna Narula. I'm a SIP program specialist, and I'm elated to be your moderator for today. But first, let me tell you about a few logistics. We will be recording and archiving this on our conference agenda page after the conference, so do not worry about it. You'll have it for about 30 days, so you can share this out with your colleagues or anyone else who you believe could benefit from this information. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and the interpretation icon in the same area can provide access to Spanish translation. As you will notice, we do have ASL interpreters, and they are spotlighted and will be joining us throughout this session, as well as the PowerPoint and the presenters. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute or go ahead and enter them in the chat, but please make sure that your volume is muted to avoid any background distractions as the presenters are speaking. Please don't be offended if I mute you, because I might hear something you don't notice. We encourage you to engage and participate, so enjoy yourself, and when possible, please keep your cameras on because we'd love to see your beautiful faces, and it's really hard to speak to a crowd without looking at anyone. So with that, Bhavna and Colleen, take the wheel.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Kristen, for that welcoming opening. My name is Dr. Colleen Myers. I am the Director of Educational Services for Hollister School District in Hollister, California. And I'm excited to be here today. Bhavna and I presented at Palm Springs last fall, I believe, not too long ago. And so we're excited to share this information with you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I am Bhavna Narula, and I'm the Director of Student Services and Special Education with Hillsborough City School District. Just from geographical standpoint, about 20 miles, 25 miles south of San Francisco. We are so excited to co-present today and share our journey and just sort of answer questions, share resources, and really be your thought partners.
Absolutely. One of us will be monitoring the chat while the other is presenting. So feel free, if you have questions, to pop those into the chat box and we will respond accordingly. Our learning objectives today in this session, participants will understand how to get started with the design and redesign of co-teaching. We're going to explore the core elements of high quality co-teaching program, and we're going to learn you'll be able to learn from Bhavna and myself about our journeys and from envisioning to building and scaling co-teaching processes and practices. Bhavna, go ahead, take it away.
All right. So just to get our creative juices flowing, we're going to do a little bit of a chat waterfall here. So when I say go, that's when you will post your thoughts. So think about a time you felt included or excluded. What was your experience and how did it make you feel? We want to anchor ourselves in our own stories because I believe they inform the work that we do and how we engage people. And so take about 10 seconds, 20 seconds to think. And then when I say go, let's do a chat waterfall. Yeah, being made to feel weird, lonely, and sad when you were excluded, feeling valued and loved. People assuming how your English was as based on where you came from. I can certainly relate to that personally. Well, thank you. Thank you for engaging in that. And as we sort of go through our session today, I'd love for you to sort of anchor yourself in this feeling. As we share our journey, our very imperfect journeys to co-teaching today. All right, can I have the next slide, please? So just to anchor ourselves in when we talk about what an inclusive partnership is, it could be anywhere from informal teaming, just sort of you and I work well together, let's talk about it. Formal teaming, the PLCs and your grade level teams, systematic integration, which is more push and support, building into the schedule, common preps, all the way through co-teaching, which is what we will be talking about today, where there are a variety of instructional models. There's professional conditioning and coaching, along with the components of formal teaming and systematic integration. Next slide, please. And so just so we are all sort of using the same language, and this actually comes from SIP, co-teaching is an instructional model. It includes 2 credentialed educators, and we'll talk about different ways in which different districts approach it. Both educators co-plan, and prior to instruction, they co-instruct and co-assess. And then SAI for our students with IEPs is provided in addition to a co-taught lesson. And that's an important distinction. And we get questions around it, so I'm happy to chat about it even after the session too. All right, why implement it? I'm not going to read the entire slide. And we are, as educators, we know sort of the obvious benefits of co-teaching, but studies have shown that it improves academic outcomes. There's improved access to general education curriculum. And then there's an access specialist and a content specialist kind of teaching together, and that's what makes co-teaching most effective. And these are sort of the anchoring principles in terms of our why of co-teaching as 2 districts. So I get to share a little bit about my district, and then Colleen will share about her journey in Hollister School District. So this is our year 1 of implementing co-teaching. This is my 3rd year in the district. However, I, as a middle school principal in a former district, had co-teaching all the way in every grade level, every core content area in my school. And so I already came sort of embedded with my why, and arrived in a new school district where they were ready to sort of kind of think differently about how we served our students. And I was a SIP grantee as a middle school principal, and I get to be the SIP grantee in the new district as well. So we are a small school district. We have about 1,300 students. We are a suburban schools district. And our students with disabilities are approximately 13%. We kind of range between 11 to 13%. And we are a suburban affluent community in the heart of Silicon Valley. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so just from a context standpoint, I have a spectrum of inclusive programs in our district, even in a small school district. It ranges from sort of a more mild mod resource program, as we know them, all the way through a mod severe, what we call learning center. But we have no self-contained programs. Every student in our campus, in addition to having their SAI services, and all the other providers, also is mainstreamed in the general education classes. Now, this can vary based on a student's IEP and students' needs, but all of our students are in general education classrooms, whether it is for the whole day or for part of the day too. So we have no self-contained programs. We have low staffing ratios. Low staffing ratios. So we are more individualized, even though our programs are small, because we have now started implementing co-teaching. I've not had to cut any staff. And then we are also beginning our work on UDL. This is our 2nd year partnering with Novak Education. And we have a group of teacher leaders known as UDL Trailblazers in our site, in our district, from each site. And part of those UDL Trailblazers are co-teachers as well. And so this is our 2nd year, and next year we plan to move this work to sites. And then we have data to show why we needed to move towards co-teaching as well.
Bhavna, we
Okay.
have a question before you get into the data. We had a question: what systemic supports are needed to ensure quality instruction is given for students and equitable share of power? And I don't know if you want to address that now or if you want to go through the data first.
Yeah, I can go through the data first. Thank you for that question. That is the number one sort of question and central principle for us. But I actually have it a little bit later in my slide deck so that you can see what kind of supports we put in place. And I'm happy to also answer questions if there are still questions about systemic supports as well. I will say that my superintendent, we are a small school district. I'm on the superintendent's cabinet, and my superintendent was the first one I got on board with this work. So just from a database standpoint, we are a high performing school district. So take a look at like our CASP scores for students with no reported disabilities, high 80s, 90s. And then let's move the slide to scores for our students with disabilities. So can we have the next slide, please? And I always say this, I've said this when I share this at conferences as well, that, your context, from your context, this may look like that's great data point. But if you think about our context in an affluent community, fairly well-resourced district, the gap is sort of, we cannot just explain it, because we do have the resources to do better by all our students. And so this is sort of the difference we have. We are like about half in compared to our students with no reported disabilities. Next slide, please. And so, data is data, but we also want to look at street data. Time and again, our social emotional learning benchmarks, and I will share that, Julie, about co-teaching in middle school, because that's where we started. Student sense of belonging. Our data shows that our students with disabilities did not feel like they belonged in their classrooms or are made to feel different. Our whole approach used to be more around a deficit-based thinking versus asset-based thinking. And then there was a culture of special education is separate from general education, and really grappling with the question around who is responsible for student learning. We started with middle school. Somebody asked a question about middle school. And the reason we started with middle school was we had the staffing in place and we had the leadership in place. This school had just gotten a new principal, and principal who also came from a background in co-teaching. I was a middle school principal for a long time with lots of background in co-teaching as well. So we kind of started in middle school because we had that confluence of, essential conditions. We also, had a moral and equity imperative to improve learning for our students. Middle school is just 3 years long, and our students head to high school in a different school district. We are a K-8 school district. Data was compelling. And in addition, our high school is starting to move to co-teaching too, our high school district. It's a separate school district. And for us, students' access to A through G eligible courses was critical, because what was happening was many of our students stayed in these SAI language arts or math classes. And it was hard to get out of that track when they arrived in high school, which resulted in them not being in A through G eligible courses. So I'm not going to be, I didn't want to be we don't want to be responsible for closing doors for our students. We should be opening the doors for our students as well. Next slide, please. And so here's a sort of a quick timeline on how this unfolded. As you can see, we kind of started in winter of 2022, even to implement it in 23-24 school year. I had from my former middle school, I had a co-teacher who was also doing part-time co-teaching coaching. This is where sometimes networks are helpful. I invited her to sort of do an orientation, but also do some deep level planning with the teams that we were starting to bring together at the middle school. So fast forward to fall, we were fortunate enough to be selected for SIP grant that provided us with that additional sort of funding to do this work well. We worked with the co-teaching team. She worked with them over summer, continuing to fall. And then our UDL sort of moved to implementation phase this year as well, our UDL work. And then at one of our elementary school, we implemented what's called a win time, what I need time, which is sort of a time where each grade level is not doing any new instruction. And we are within our MTSS solely focused on providing support with students, what they need, when they need it. And so instead of saying, well, this student needs to be referred to special education, or like somebody else needs to take other people's problems, OPP is what I call it. Instead of having that mindset, it's like all students are our students. How do we, so win time kind of came out of that. Spring 2023, we started building the master schedule for middle school. We started with special education master scheduling first. Our co-teachers have common preps. So our special education teacher and the general education teacher who's co-teaching have common preps in the master schedule. And departmentalized co-teachers is what we went with, which means that the teacher who's co-teaching math is not going to be co-teaching English. It was a different special education teacher who co-taught English. And then we allocated staffing. This is where, having leadership sponsor this work is important. And continuing that work on UDL kind of helped us implement co-teaching. And just looking ahead, I already know, because it's May already, we will be expanding co-teaching sections next year at our middle school. We are adding a science section, adding a 7th grade math section. And then we are also expanding it to one of our elementary schools with the reading specialist and RSP teacher as sort of the access end of things. And then in elementary school, it can be a little harder, right? Because one teacher teaches all the content areas. And the way we've decided is writing tends to be an area of struggle for many of our students. So in 3rd grade, we'll have a writing co-teaching. And then in 4th grade, we will have sort of a math co-teaching in elementary school too. And then we are utilizing our SIP grant for co-teaching district-wide. Next slide, please. And so this is something I couldn't overemphasize. Master schedule is key. All of your special education classes must be scheduled first. Common preps are critical. And this is something I've learned the hard way. When I first as an assistant principal, dipped my toes into co-teaching in a very different district. I did not build common preps in the master schedule. And I brought willing partners together, so they made it work, but that I would say was not effective. It was disaster, and it actually got in the way of expanding co-teaching. So we corrected that. And then when I became a principal, as a master schedule person, I knew what I had to do if I needed to build effective co-teaching structures in my school. The other piece to know is research shows that a co-taught section should not have any more than 33% of students with disabilities. That is really critical. And I know this is hard when you are trying to build co-teaching, but this is important, and it should help you prioritize who are good candidates for co-teaching versus not just having all special education students in co-teaching, because then at that point, it's not a general education class. And so we've really tried to stick to this 33%, and it has helped us prioritize. In my dream world, every single class will be a co-taught class, but it has helped us prioritize. Next slide, please. Okay, so the willing partners piece is super key here. Thou shalt is not the way to launch co-teaching when you're new to it. And then just that investment in professional learning. I've really sort of made that a priority for our co-teaching coach to be coming several times during the year to do deep level planning. And again, like I said, really being mindful of who are the students who would benefit from co-teaching. I've often looked at like what math goals they have before we sort of think about a co-teaching math, co-taught math class placement. Same is true for language arts. And then really focused on heterogeneous classes. Because the other thing that happens is, a counselor might say, well, these 4 students with 504 plans might benefit from it. But we really have to kind of maintain that 33% ratio of students with disabilities. Next slide, please. Again, the other thing I do want to add is when you're launching co-teaching, I've done it this year, I did that as a principal to really showcase their learning. They're doing something that is considered brave. They are also learning through this journey. They're not perfect. So the more we can do for our staff to understand, sort of showcase the learning, making learning public in terms of the co-teaching teams, the better it is. And our communication with community has been in a framework of we have this amazing opportunity to offer to all of our students, and this is how we've built these classes. And I have to say, happily, when you before you launch it, there can be questions about, my goodness, how will the community respond to it? And I have to say, actually, we have a different kind of a problem. We have more and more parents wanting their students to be placed in co-taught classes. And then perfection is not the goal. You want to start slow to go fast. And that's really important. Like, sometimes we think about like everything needs to be in line before we can take that first step. And I would say the first step is what will help you get everything else in line too. So really sort of focused on that. What we are hearing, we recently did a huge presentation for our board on our co-teaching launch this year, and we invited our co-teachers to co-present with us, and they talked about how that has impacted their instructional quality and how they think about access. Some of our co-teachers talked about, I teach one co-taught language arts section, but all of the other 6th grade non-co-taught sections benefit from what I learned through a co-taught section. Parents, like I said, we cannot keep up with that demand. And from students, this is where street data is helpful. Many of our students have not had success in our school systems. And we are starting to hear, like, I never saw myself as a math student, but now I think I can do it. And all it took was intentional planning and building a structure that provided them with scaffolded access. Next slide, please. This is posted on the website, so you have access to this slide deck. But what I've done here is I've added a whole list of resources about co-teaching in our district. So you'll see a sample master schedule. You will see some of the slide decks our co-teaching coach has used with our team. You will see some learning around UDL, and then you will also see the board presentation that we did just a month ago, just around like we have one math co-taught section this year at middle school, 6th grade, and a 6th grade and 7th grade language arts co-taught sections, which we're expanding next year. So you'll see all of those resources. I'll answer, I'm keeping track of the questions. So there's a question around, are there different co-teaching models instead of being in the classroom, being a resource as well? I'm curious if co-teaching changes study skills in a secondary level. So since we are like right at the beginning of this work, I will say, yes, there are different co-teaching models. There are about 6 co-teaching models. And putting a plug for SIP. SIP has an excellent Padlet on co-teaching that I invite you to check out. And they do have information about 6 different models. And within the same classroom, the model may change depending on the lesson being conducted, right? So if it changes study skills at a secondary level, I would say yes, we've actually, because we have a very small group of students who are in both language arts and math co-teaching, and their study skills class was taking the place of their elective. We've actually scaled back on their studies. I think they have it every other day instead of every day, and they were able to pick an elective because we were able to get to these students with their general education classes. I just want to add here for all of the special educators in the room and case managers, we have not used co-teaching minutes as service minutes in our IEP. And I will say that even districts that have been doing co-teaching for a while, we really cannot justify that co-teaching, the SAI minutes are being provided through co-teaching. So our students, we have not reflected that in the minutes, and we don't intend to for at least the next few years, and then reevaluate after that. And there are several reasons for it. The practical reason is that staffing and who's on our team kind of depends, so I don't want to be having minutes then and offering co-teaching as service minutes and then not being able to offer, for example, a section in that grade level. So that's one reason. Plus the SAI goals, SAI minutes, working on the goal work is not something that can be affected in a co-teaching session. Then in that case, the special educator will be exclusively working with special education students. So we've not done that. And I think that is it for me. And I'm handing it off to my colleague, Dr. Colleen Myers.
Thank you, Bhavna. All right, everyone. So just a background on Hollister School District. We're in San Benito County. We're nestled between Monterey and the Central Valley and just south of Silicon Valley. So we've got a nice little area here where we have just about 5,800 students, and you can see the breakdown of our population. We're TK-8 elementary program, and we have 10 schools on 9 campuses. So I'm going to talk about our journey and what our structures in place. So the next slide has our educational programs and structures. It shows you the program, what we offer, and how or where we are doing co-taught, where we're doing pull out, push in, and which are self-contained. This is something that we are targeting for next year so that we can be more inclusive. And so in preliminary plans are moving to like learning models or learning centers for our mild mod students so that they are included in the general ed day, but then also have that time, like Bhavna had mentioned, for very specific targeted supports. So we are doing across the board. We're not 100% at every single school site, but we have been starting to expand, and we look forward to that. So why were we compelled to co-teaching? What was the beginning of this? This is HSD was referred to by or targeted because of our minutes. So we had in the middle school students that were inadvertently missing out on their opportunity to be included in the general ed by being taken to resource for a certain number of minutes that may not have addressed their the IEP minutes. So we came up with a co-teaching model at our middle schools first. And so this is when our RSP teacher joins our co-teacher. And as Bhavna had said, we have scheduled a common prep period for them so that they come together at least once a week. Some meet every day, and they align their teaching strategies. So thank you, SIP, for structuring the boot camps that we have for our new teachers that are considering co-teaching or just entering co-teaching. And so they are supported with the models, and they have the opportunity to plan routinely on how they're going to present the material and which model they're going to implement. So our current co-teaching schedule, obviously I just had described, is the RSP teacher comes in and supports the gen ed teacher for a full period. And as Bhavna mentioned, it's best practice for no more than a third of those class or the students in that class to have IEPs that are academic IEPs. There may be more with speech or other IEPs, but these are for academics. And so our co-teachers get an additional prep for planning. And then in our TK8 schools, we have a PE teacher that takes the students out to PE. So those teachers then have their prep period because they need that extra time. So what are some essential considerations and conditions if you're planning to implement? If we go to the next slide, I urge you to just start. We started during a pandemic. Why not? So you need to get the support of your school board, educate yourself, of course, showcase positive teacher experiences often, recruit early, take advantage of those new teachers that are coming to you. They're eager, they are open-minded, they don't have, they may not have some habits that you would prefer or may get in the way or inhibit co-teaching. And tend the co-teaching garden amply and often. So we have a coach that here at the district level that connects with our co-teachers and keeps on top of what do they need, what do they feel throughout the year so that they know they're supported. But really, this is an organic grassroots effort. And so we do not incentivize our co-teaching with a stipend or anything. It just is not smart sustainability wise because, you know, you may have everybody wanting to co-teach and, you know, we have, given the ratio of gen ed to special ed, we, you know, have to be cognizant of our capacity as far as staffing. So we have a coach at the district level that kind of tends to these teachers, and we monitor and the data and how is this working. Currently, we've at the very beginning focused on math, and now we're moving into our primary grades. We're doing inclusion in TK and kinder next year and starting that way. We're really excited to see the ramifications of inclusion at the primary levels, reducing what might be unnecessary referrals for special ed when students learn to adapt amongst their peers on both the gen ed and the special ed side. So very excited about that. So here's just some data, our preliminary data. You can see that the pink line is our special ed line and our blue line was our gen ed line. So Rancho Santana 6th grade reading inclusive classroom, you can see from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, phenomenal, closing a gap. It's working. Then we had Sarah Vista, 6th grade reading inclusive classroom, similar data, while we had students kind of flatlining at the beginning, at the midpoint. Yeah, at Sarah Vista, they really took off at the end when we were getting that pace and tempo going. So very exciting there. And then at Mays Middle School, this is a comprehensive middle school for math. We had similar closing of the gap, very exciting stuff. And teachers will report that they feel comfortable and confident. They are appreciative of this model and practice. And students will then say, if you come and walk through these classrooms, that they, you know, they understand that they're getting the support they need, and there's no differentiation between a SPED student and a gen ed student. And same for teachers. So if you stop and ask, you know, which teacher do you go to for help, they would say, well, they're both here. So, you know, that's nice to not have students categorized, labeled, and same for our staff members. I think there's, let's see, a few more on math. So math is where we really focused on at the our TK8s, Rancho Santana and Cerro Vista. You can see there just an acceleration of achievement and closing that gap again. And then we get to our co-teaching roadmap. So this is possible. Like I said, just start. Just start with one partnership. Maybe you have 2 curious teachers that have been hearing about this. Maybe you have a TK middle grade group that says, you know what, let's rotate by subject. So I'll teach all the math, you teach all the ELA, and you know, let's incorporate our RSP teacher into that. That's very successful at our TK8s, that particular model. But we had, we initiated a partnership with SIP in August of 2019, and that was in the heart of a pandemic. We continued along and we made it through year 1 planning and implementation through 2021. Then year 2, we augmented the teams, we built our capacity. 22, 23, we had teachers selected, you know, we increased our model for grade level options. And then this year we expanded even further. And now we've dabbled in the primary with our TKs and kinders. How might this look for our students? So very exciting. It's so it's such an exciting thing to offer our students when you see, for all the things that you named in the beginning, as far as how you felt when you were excluded, and really mitigating those and preventing students from feeling that way ever. So that is Hollister's story. And I see that a lot of you have questions, so we can address those as we see. Bhavna, would you by chance want to, since I haven't,
I've been answering some of the questions in chat.
If you guys would like, sorry to interrupt you, Bhavna, but I have quite a few questions as well in the Q&A. So if you don't mind, I can facilitate the questions if you guys don't mind answering them.
That would be great. I just took some time to answer while Colleen was presenting and keeping an eye, but yes, that would be perfect. Thank you.
All right. So the first question I have is, how does belongingness happen in the inclusive environment if there's no shared language, culture, and modality?
That's a great question. I will say that, you know, our work on universal design for learning, along with very strong focus on tier 1 social emotional learning practices and curricula, and sort of our benchmark assessments have been great data points for us to be able to think about what belonging looks like in a classroom. I will say that even from a co-teaching perspective, the sense of belonging, you know, that's sort of a multi-layered aspect to belonging, right? But if I don't believe my classroom belongs to me, that my needs or my learning style is something that the teachers value, respect, I'm seen because the instruction is designed to meet my needs. That's one aspect of belonging. And we've really focused on that. This is where the willing partners have helped us, because I had general education teachers who already had that mindset of all students are my students and how am I connecting with every student in my classroom. And then adding the co-teaching element there has just taken it to the next level, because we had a vested interest in when we launch it, we want it to be successful. There was a question around like, should we focus on Gen Ed first? Yes, in an ideal world, like that's what I said, all our ducks in a row, we kind of shift mindsets. But more and more research shows that, you know, actions also inform mindsets. So one before the other is not necessarily the case. You know, if you have those willing partners, I would just, you know, the way I worked on that is like I dedicated a lot of resources to getting them ready for co-teaching. and waiting on like sort of and thinking about like showcasing their learning and everyone else sort of learning from them. I mean, I'm happy to release staff to go observe co-teaching as well. In fact, the elementary schools, I took them to my former district to see co-teaching in action too. So I'm, this is how like we choose to approach it. Again, obviously, this is not the only way to approach it. I don't know how Colleen, did you want to share anything about that question?
Sure. So, I mean, we have a diverse group of students that come to us every day. So it's easy to implement that diversity because it's coming to us in language, in culture, in ability. And so as we do with every student, we adapt and we support with that. For example, I can speak to a student that was a non-articulate student in our middle grades that was fully included, and he communicated through a tablet. And so we provided opportunities where, essentially he had grown with his peers. And so there was no difference in instruction. He of course had health issues also. So he had a person with him, but, the students and the staff adapt to the unique needs of each student. And so I feel like that's the best part about co-teaching, is that you have another person there to help support the individual student needs, and thinking about the ramifications of our community, how each of these students in his peers have now been equipped with responding to the diversity that they may encounter in our community and beyond. I hope that helps.
And Bhavna, the question is specifically requesting that if you guys have any advice for how this affects students who might be deaf or hard of hearing.
Yeah, I noticed that, and thank you, Amy, for that question. I will say that for our students who are non-verbal, we don't necessarily have deaf and hard of hearing students currently in our school. I'm just trying to think of specific students, but we do have, as Colleen mentioned, students who are non-verbal. And the way we have impacted, we've included a student with, who has an AAC device is we actually, and this is not in a co-taught section, I just want to add that. We, in our general education classroom, even before we sort of, think about inclusion, we've done a lot of groundwork in, we have a partnership with an organization called Changing Perspectives, which is all around inclusion. We've done a lot of groundwork with our educators on what inclusion looks like. It's not just that the student will come and there will be a paraeducator with the student. It's more about like, how am I thinking about sort of a lesson that I'm about to do, and how does it meet the needs of a student who has an AAC device? And this is where sort of like the universal design for learning comes in, because now you're providing several access points to all your students. And so we've definitely done that work. But as I think about, again, we are in year 1 of co-teaching. My current co-taught sections in middle schools, we just, in middle school, we do not have a deaf and hard of hearing program or our students in any other program currently. But that's something that, I look forward to sort of adapting and having that flexibility and improving our teachers' skill set when we do have that opportunity.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that too. What we've found is we have segregated these students for so long, and they go, when they're in special ed, they go away to a space and that teacher teaches them. But that particular teacher may not necessarily have the understanding of what's going on in a gen ed classroom. So ultimately, right, we want the student to be in gen ed full-time to be able to participate. And so when we have these co-taught classes, the special education teacher fully understands the demands, the rigor, the pace and tempo of a general ed classroom. And so that has been a huge pedagogical shift that we have seen, is that now we have special ed students that are, okay, I understand the level to which I need to help my students get to be so that they can fully participate with their gen ed peers. And I think that would maybe apply to that particular question, is you know, understanding what is needed for this student or students that are similar, have similar disabilities of that. So.
Alrighty, next question is, what systemic supports are needed to ensure quality instruction is given for students an equitable share of power?
Colleen, you want to go first?
Sure. So I think that it's it starts with an internal pathway with our students. So when they see that they don't, that feeling of inferiority, and if I'm reading the question right or hearing the question right, so when our students are together and they see that, you know, I don't have to participate in a special location or a special area, then they do feel like they're part of it. I can do this, and they often, you know, surpass their own expectations. And on the flip side, for a gen ed, it also helps with equally empowering students so that they understand, like, okay, for example, my own son, he was not special ed, but he struggled in math. And so when he was in a co-taught class, he's like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I feel like my mindset of my learner mindset is now has improved. And so it broke down those barriers that students may put in front of their own selves so that they can achieve as everyone else. I don't know if that addressed.
I think that's, yes, that's great, because I think there was a question about shared power with teachers, and that is very true. You know, we don't want our special education teachers to be glorified paraeducators in the classroom, and so that's where sort of that pre-planning, setting up. I encourage you to read a book called Co-Teaching is a Dance, or it's a Marriage by Wendy Murawski, and that exactly talks about how do you set up like simple things like, where will I put my belongings when I come into your classroom as a co-teacher. And so we did a lot of that work sort of the spring before we even launched co-teaching, and then over summer around what arrangements will look like, all the way down to the shared spaces that both co-teachers will have. I have to say that, like, in some cases, it worked really well. It was absolutely equity and shared, in terms of sharing the power, because both of the co-teachers, when you walk into that classroom now, you may not be able to tell who's a math teacher and who's the special education teacher, because they both decide who's going to be the primary instructor for this particular lesson, who's going to be the support. And so they did that. Now, that was a longer ramp for us for one of our English classrooms, where we kind of had to recalibrate and think about what was that power equal? Were there opportunities to co-instruct as well? And having that co-teaching coach come and do learning specifically on that with that team helped us move it along forward. And so in terms of that shared power, that is crucial. I mean, those are the things that may seem small, but matter a whole lot in terms of how even the students see you in the classroom as well. And you can see that difference where it's sort of that equal equity in power, how students view, versus where, the special education teacher may be a glorified paraeducator.
And I just want to add just real quick, there's so many questions. I wish we could get to them all. I do want to add, just to reiterate, the benefit for both teachers. So not only is RSP teacher, the special ed teacher, learning from the gen ed teacher, but the gen ed teacher is learning from the special education teacher. So both of their skill sets are enhanced to appropriately address needs that arise for, you know, certain situations in the future. And it's just like the perfect kind of instructional improvement model that you can, you know, sponsor in what I've seen with our teams.
I responded to a question. Sorry, guys. I know earlier that was asked by Julie. It was around when you have interested in seeing how you co-teach in middle schools with different teachers, each grade level and subject, only one specialist levels. So my response was that you start small, and I think this might also go for one of the other questions a little bit below, because you guys had already mentioned starting small. So taking that one ed specialist and using them for one class and one subject just to get started, and to also think about your other credentialed specialists. So your SLPs, your reading specialists, your math interventionists, those are also credentialed specialists that you can use for co-teaching. So that could be a possibility in when you're looking at which sections and how many to offer. So it doesn't always have to rest on your ed specialist. Is there anything that you guys would like to add?
Yes, I will say that next year when we expanded to elementary schools, one of our co-taught sections will be with a reading specialist. And there are models out there around your ELD teacher, your reading specialist, any math interventionist that you have. So it's not always only the special education teacher, because I know how that staffing works too. But really being creative around like who are the support people. Somebody asked me a question about OT. And we've had our OTs do a lot of work in general education classroom in terms of sort of developing, doing lessons, but also coaching and consulting with teachers. And next year we'll have like a sort of an OT toolkit in our primary classrooms. Too, and our OTs have done that, but we don't have active co-teaching with OTs. But I've had co-teaching with SLP in my previous school as well, especially for students on the autism spectrum.
And I want to just note, I mean, our high school is a great model, San Benito High School District. They co-teach for PE, for ELD, for math, for science, you know, all of their classes, at least every major division has a co-taught class available. So it isn't exclusive to math or ELA, and you know, stepping outside of the box, just bringing teachers together to support students where they are, no matter disability or anything. So it is possible. It's a little challenging, but it's possible.
The next question we have is, what have you observed about how long it takes for a co-teaching relationship to fully develop? Trust between co-teaching partners seems to be a factor. And how long do you commit to keeping partners together in a working relationship?
I will say, and I think I'm gonna speak to my prior experience, since this is our first year in Hillsborough implementing co-teaching. In my prior experience, where we had 6 years of co-teaching, I would say that while I had staff turnover, but because this was sort of part of a system in our school, when I hired new teachers, I looked for, thankfully now up and down the state and in other states, co-teaching is happening in schools. So I looked for teachers who had some experience with that or had the right mindset. In terms of, you know, the number of years, I'm not sure there's a magic number. This next year, I am keeping the same co-teaching partners. Thankfully, I have no turnover next year, at least as of today. And I'm adding, you know, a new math teacher who actually has come from a co-taught background to the mix as well. But what I've done is for my special education teachers, they are not teaching multiple content areas in middle school. They're only specializing in one content area. And that allows me to include that special educator even in the curriculum trainings that the district may organize.
All right. We have another question that is, sorry guys, there are so many. And I just want you guys to know if your questions are not answered, I'm going to save this chat so your questions can be responded to. So don't feel like you can't continue to ask them. Please, please, please put them either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will make sure that you guys get your questions answered if they're not allowed. We only have about 3 minutes left, so I think that gives us time for one more question. This one is, what about students that are abled as extensive support need? So I think that's something that both of you guys can speak to.
What was that? I'm sorry, students that were what?
Labeled as extensive support needs.
Okay, well, I think that is the case that I described earlier of a student that was nonverbal. I mean, it required a team to support him through the day, and he was fully mainstreamed for the whole day. I think that's where the conversation and the commitment is so critical from your board and superintendent, the administration, so that those resources are allocated to that student. So educating the board on what is inclusion and why it's important, and those things, making sure that the student has everything he or she needs to be successful and participate to their ability has been something that I appreciate about my district and my board.
Yeah, I would say same here. For our students with extensive support needs, we have an opportunity next year for our teacher our special education teacher who serves students with extensive support needs to also actually have a co-teaching sort of section in kindergarten next year, actually. And so I do agree that superintendent sponsorship, the board sponsorship, and the board hearing about how co-teaching is going directly from teachers has been tremendous, because the board has said, what support do you need in order to expand it, right? Like, that's what you want. Just them hearing from families how well co-teaching is going also matters. So I would say those are the sort of some of the barriers. I mean, did we face barriers? Absolutely. Our teacher union has not really, I mean, we have not heard anything sort of negative from a teachers union. I do think that our co-teachers are so excited about it and, have a lot of credibility with the rest of the staff has helped us with sort of navigating even that aspect. And yes, there are barriers for sure, but, just like UDL, how can I anticipate barriers and plan for it is how we've approached it as a school district.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Bhavna and Colleen, for your attendance and commitment to our students with disabilities and their families. It is our mission to accelerate our educational system, to innovate, include, and impact outcomes positively for all, from birth to childhood and beyond. I do see a message from Mallory speaking on the dismissiveness of the significance of deaf students. It's definitely not that we're dismissing them. It's just that at this time, we don't necessarily have all of the answers for that particular question. So we do not feel like they should be dismissed in any way. We just note that when we're able to have that experience, we'll be able to have a better perspective on that. So please don't feel like
and we are here to learn too. So if you have any input about that, I know both Colleen and I would love to learn more and how we can do better by a group of students whose needs you may not have seen in our presentation as being addressed. So we really appreciate that that thought too. And We look forward to learning more. Our email addresses are on our presentation. And if you have any follow-up questions, a question about a resource in the folder that I uploaded, please reach out to us.
And we it's 11:02, so thank you guys again. Please be sure to enter all of your other information in our surveys so that we can definitely take heed to all of your suggestions and input. And don't forget to join our tune up with our wonderful DJ B Diamond on the ones and twos, and check out our social lounge to take a selfie. You guys have a great day, and thanks again.